Thank you for joining us for the Smithsonian National Museum of American Indians Youth in Action. Youth in Action is an ongoing series investigating the work of young Native activists and changemakers as they strive to improve issues facing their communities. This episode is dedicated to exploring the way young Indigenous filmmakers are using film as a medium for change and activism. My name is Justin Mujitz. I'm a program specialist at the museum. I have a beard and I'm wearing glasses and a brown sweater. Before we start, we would like to gratefully acknowledge the Indigenous communities on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the vibrant and diverse Native communities who continue to make their home here today. Our moderator today is James Lujan. He's a filmmaker, playwright, and educator from Taos Pueblo. For 10 years, he has served as Department Chair of Cinematic Arts and Technology at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. This past year, he was appointed to the New Mexico Governor's Council on Film and Media Industries. James, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Justin. So once again, I'll be moderating this discussion, and I have short black hair. I'm wearing glasses, a black blazer, and a blue Oxford shirt. So today we'll be talking to 3 up-and-coming Indigenous filmmakers, learning about their work and how they hope to use the medium of cinema to affect change. So let's start with Anpa'o Locke, an Afro-Indigenous writer and filmmaker who comes from the Standing Rock Nation. She currently resides on Tiwa territory in Albuquerque, New Mexico. From 2018 to 2019, she was a fellow for the Awake Youth Media Fellowship. In February 2021, she won Best Experimental at the 5 College Film Festival. Let's take a look at some of her work.
I will be visible. You will see me now.
So welcome, Anpa'o. Could you tell us a little more about yourself?
How medakyapi chante washte na pechuzape Anpa'o Locke. Hello, my relatives. My name is Anpa'o Locke. I currently live in Albuquerque, but I'm from the Standing Rock Nations. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a filmmaker and writer, and I'm really interested in exploring the Black Native experience. And I have short hair, and I'm wearing glasses, Native earrings, as well as a black shirt.
Great. Next, we have Lejend Yazzie, who is a Diné filmmaker and multimedia artist. She attended the Sidney Poitier New American Film School with a focus on directing. Lejend is also a 2-time alumna of the Sundance Indigenous program. Let's take a look at some of her work.
Are you fucking kidding me? Auntie?
Lejend, thanks for being here. Could you tell us a little more about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I am Lejend Yazzie. I am Diné. I am currently calling in from the Navajo Nation. I enjoy making work about Native women, about the Indigenous experience and the queer experience. I am currently wearing a white sweater with a black shirt and blue Native earrings.
Great. And also with us today is Petyr Xyst from Laguna Pueblo. He's an Indigenous Film Fund Fellow with the Sundance Institute and winner of Imaginative's Innovation in Storytelling Award. In 2019, he was nominated for Rolex's Mentor and Protege program, and in 2022 was a finalist for NBCU's New Mexico Directors Initiative. Here's a look at some of his work.
What if there was a way to get to know one another without all this bickering? A way to truly live in our shoes. See what we see.
It also means that we're pushing Operation Tomahawk ahead.
Operation Tomahawk?
to tonight?
What's Operation Tomahawk?
The biggest, boldest promise of a way to bring these long-distance cultures together. To finally know the answer to how is a shareholder?
Peter, thanks for being here. Could you tell us a little more about yourself?
Guatiopa. My name is Petyr Xyst. I'm currently based in Albuquerque. From the Laguna Pueblo. A lot of my work touches on narratives that center around class, race, and sort of the absurdities of being a person of color, coming of age in this hellhole that's the 21st century. I have shoulder-length black hair. I'm wearing overalls and a green shirt.
Great. So thank you all again for being here. Let's go ahead and start our discussion. First thing I'd like to know is why you all decided to become filmmakers and what films and filmmakers inspired you. Anpa'o, we'll start with you.
Yeah, the reason why I decided to become a filmmaker because I was horrible at math. No, I'm just kidding. I just found it really exciting to be creative and being able to show my activism through this work. And I think what was a really pivotal moment for me as I come from the Standing Rock Nation was being able to see how social media took our activism, our protest to the next level. And so I think moving forward, I always saw filmmaking as a tool for me to be able to not only elevate my own voice, but elevate my community's needs and my community's desires. So I think filmmaking for me is not only something I find to be able to release myself creatively. I think it's something I actively use to support my community. So,
and what sort of films inspired you, Anpa'o?
I guess the type of films that have always inspired me, because I think I'm the type of person who becomes, I guess I would say, is supported through humor. So I feel like any humor films like comedy, such as Scott Pilgrim, or basically anything with Seth Rogen in it, I think that definitely inspired me. That's definitely unclassy, I will say. But I think just having that art and knowing that there's a lot of ways you can use filmmaking for good, for humor, for telling the truth, documentaries, I think it's just, I'm attracted to the how versatile the industry is. So hopefully that answers.
Yeah, great. Lejend, how about you? What made you want to become a filmmaker?
I was interested in filmmaking because it blends all of the different art forms that I really enjoy. It has costumes, it has performance, it has writing, it has other types of hands-on art forms like props, and I really enjoy how everybody comes together to collaborate for a specific story, and it just brings a whole team of people together. And also because there is a lack of representation for Indigenous folks in film, and film is a universal language that anybody can watch and understand, and they can learn and take something new away from a culture or something. I grew up watching international films. A lot of the time, my mom and I would go to the library, check out Korean films all the time, and it taught me a lot about Korea and their culture before I could even understand anything else. But film is a great, powerful tool to see yourself on screen and also to make a positive impact on your community.
What were some of your favorite films or filmmakers?
My favorite films and filmmakers, I really like a lot of different genres. I have found a new love for horror, is what I've found out. I used to always be too scared to watch any of them, but through the years, I found a new appreciation for it. I also really enjoy dramas a lot because it has a lot of things, they can provide a lot of information about a family or certain dynamics that you don't see that quite often on the screen, and I really enjoy that, and I really enjoy the emotion and the stories that come out of drama films.
Great. Peter, let's turn to you. What made you decide to pursue the path of a filmmaker?
It's a tricky question. It's kind of or it's the sort of skill that I've carried with me the longest in my life. I've been doing it forever. I guess those early moments that made me interested in filmmaking were just kind of messing around with my friends. My parents had this giant DV camera where you put a whole videotape in, and I found that somewhere, and I just started pretending to be making a Star Wars movie. That got me into stuff like stop motion and animation, and like Anpa'o Locke has said, what about film interests me is that it has this multiplicity dimension in it. You have music, which I'm interested in, and also drama, theater, literature, and you can kind of just bring all these things together. And what excites me most about film or watching films is like seeing that harmony sort of come together, and it's such an exciting thing. And on set too, you can sort of tell when that's happening. I don't know. It's just fun to make stuff. I don't know.
And did you have any particularly favorite films or filmmakers that influenced you?
Like I said, Star Wars was the first thing that kind of set me on that path. My dad introduced me to a lot of science fiction, which is how I got that bent. 2001, 2010, Blade Runner, stuff like that. Right now, I'm really interested in filmmakers of color using genre to their advantage and exploring social themes through genre. His name gets thrown around a lot, but like Jordan Peele and also like Bong Joon-ho in particular, I'm such fans of their work. Yeah.
Great. Anpa'o, has your native culture had any sort of influence over the types of films you make?
I would say 100% because I think, especially someone as who I identify as Afro-Indigenous, I'm both Black and Native. So I think not only has my nativeness informed the type of art I really wanted to create, I think having the nuance of also being biracial and understanding how, I guess, Blackness is perceived and how anti-Blackness is a world phenomenon. And I think one of the topics I typically really explore a lot is experiencing the lateral violence I have as an Afro-Indigenous person. So definitely a lot of my identity has informed greatly my artistic vision. And yeah, so like me being Lakota is has something that has been through and through in my films. And I want to make sure that's so present because yeah, it's one of the most important communities to me now. And also having going up through ceremony and being Lakota spiritually, that has also shaped who I think of myself as a person. So 100%.
Because I've watched some of your work and it tends to lean toward the experimental. And,
yes, it definitely does. Definitely weird.
and how does your native culture affect your approach to experimental work?
So I specifically think within my film Eyes, I think that has shaped a lot because I wanted to create a film that not only does uses experimental ways, but seeing how that can affect the Native identity. So specifically, I just wanted to talk about surveillance with Eyes. So just having those nuanced understanding while I'm doing the actual form of filmmaking, I think that's what makes it Native cinema. So having not only I would say the tool set and understanding of what a Native culture is and using that in the form. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Lejend, the work of yours that I saw, it was blending the horror genre with your Native culture. Could you talk a little bit about how you approach that in your work?
Yeah, I know that for my tribe specifically, Diné people can be wary of the horror and the macabre, and traditionally that subject is often considered taboo within our culture. I grew up kind of telling scary stories a lot of the time with my friends and my Native family all the time, and that was just kind of a no-brainer for me because being a Native woman in this world can be very terrifying at times. And because we're experiencing the two avenues coming from both sides. You're experiencing the gender, you're also experiencing the race at the same time, and the way that those two influence my life in the way that I am perceived in this culture, in this society. And although most of the time it can be great and it's a beautiful thing, there are also moments where that can be a little scary. And I think that it's important to not shy away from that. I think it's important to speak about these things, otherwise they won't be addressed at all. For me in particular, with my film, I wanted to capture the feeling of when I was smaller, and I would always tell scary stories with my family. That was always a form of bonding and a form of like creating a special relationship with my aunties, my grandma, and like my mother. And that's just how I've learned in my culture and my family to kind of show our love and our affection. And you're also scared, but at the same time, you're telling jokes at the same time. So it's kind of to like ease the pain a little bit.
So, Peter, the work of yours that I saw incorporated both humor and elements of your native culture, specifically satire, which I find is something you don't see in a lot of native work. So I was wondering about your approach.
Right. I guess I was always interested in satire and humor in general within Indigenous communities, particularly as a means to get through really harrowing, traumatic situations. This type of gallows humor that I would read in books all the time and see in movies, and just hear about from my family. And I was sort of interested in exploring that duality and getting to like why it's so effective, I guess, and then translating that into my own work. I don't know. A lot of my adolescence was defined by sort of being the odd one out. I'm from Laguna Pueblo. I was born in Albuquerque. I lived in Seattle for 15 years, though. That was my entire real adolescence. And a lot of my perspective is sort of defined by, being out of place, being the poorest person within a rich neighborhood, being one of 3 Native kids at a school of thousands of people. I had to get through that somehow, and humor was how I instinctively moved towards it, or got through it, I should say. And I guess that's sort of just translated into my work innately. I can't really avoid it.
Right. So, Anpa'o, do you consider yourself to be an activist in your film, with your film work? And if so, what sort of changes are you hoping to make in terms of people's attitudes and towards natives? What are you hoping to accomplish?
Yes, I would consider myself to be an activist. If my Standing Rock family heard me and I said no, they would be really shocked. But I think what I'm really hoping to accomplish, that's something that's been really a big priority of mine, is I'm currently the communications director for Earth Guardians, which is a nonprofit serving to support youth activists in the environmentalist movement. So I would definitely consider myself a climate justice activist, and really striving for using media to really uplift not only youth voices, but specifically Native youth, which I believe we're one of the front runners for this climate justice movement. We hold the biggest and largest biodiversity within the lands we steward. So just hoping that people can acknowledge and recognize that we need to be centered, and using my filmmaking, the tools that I was able to gain through undergrad and having experience with other people, really to uplift Indigenous communities as we go through climate change. So I definitely would consider myself to be an activist. I am a water protector through and through. Yeah, I'm definitely down for the cause.
Yeah, great. So, Lejend, same question. Do you consider yourself to be an activist, and what are you hoping to change?
I would consider myself an activist. I have been on this journey for not as long as everybody else has, but I think that growing up, you kind of learn to kind of find yourself within the role. And in terms of my work in my films, I really want to change the way that people see the queer community, but also specifically the gender Native women and how they're presented in our work and film, because so often Native women are treated as like familial roles or as an uphold for a male character. And I really want to show that female characters, specifically in Native work, can be autonomous and they can be independent and they can be strong, but they also don't have to be the strong matriarch stereotype. They can also be weak, they can also show emotion, they can be so many different things, and they can so many times that's often overlooked, and they can have like a diverse personality. Is that something that I really want to focus on in my work as well?
Great. So Peter, with your work that I saw, I noticed that you were sort of playing on some of the stereotypes that we have seen natives depicted over the years. So what exactly are you trying to accomplish in terms of activism and social change with your films?
Right. And all of those satirical elements within those films, I made sure to, like everything that's in there that's offensive already exists in the world somehow. There's dialogue that talks about Navajo hipster panties and stuff like that. Those are things that Urban Outfitters sold up until, they might even sell them now. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is to convey the feeling of anger, of latent racism that exists in a society that might consider itself to be progressive, to be, anti-racist, stuff like that, while there are these little ticks here and there. And I think a lot of white people personally have a limit to which they'll be like, oh, but that's not actually racist, right? And there's this sort of, like I said, like anger that builds up and builds up. And, this is sort of a culmination of the perception that I have had walking through the world, getting just like things thrown at you that you just kind of have to keep moving with, even though this anger is within you. I kind of view this film as an outlet to just, I don't know, call that out, recognize it, convey in a elevated, heightened tone what I feel on a about day-to-day basis.
Well, that's interesting. Do you see some latent racism among progressives, among the left?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's such a deep problem within societies across the planet that exists in every ideology. I mean, Indigenous people carry their own internalized racism within us. And yeah, I think it's everywhere. I think it's sort of a virtuous thing to just have to keep calling it out. You move one step forward, 2 steps backward, but you do keep getting somewhere as long as you keep knowing that there's not necessarily, we've done it, we've solved racism, but that it's a constant problem we have to work on.
Yeah, Anpa'o, I saw you nodding there too. Have you noticed some of that racism on the left?
Oh, for sure. I think I mentioned like even just going on beyond the left, I think even like within the community, I've definitely, like I mentioned, experienced lateral violence from people who consider themselves to be really like progressive, really left, really woke, and then say the most out-of-pocket thing possibly to say to me. So it's definitely there, and it's definitely a conversation that I think we need to have not only as a community, but also just like to better ourselves, just having these conversations on how to truly decolonize and decolonize in terms of a metaphor. So, yeah.
And Lejend, how do you feel about that?
I agree 100%. A lot of times I feel like people mean well also, but really it just kind of comes off as fetishization and kind of like glorifying of us, and they have these preconceived notions of our cultures and our identities, and also they just keep these stereotypes within their minds, but that aren't really helping at all. But yeah, I would agree 100% with both Anpa'o and Petyr.
Okay, so we're trying to change attitudes, and we're establishing that not just within, what we might consider, traditional misunderstandings about Native people, but also for those who might consider themselves to be liberal and progressive. So there's a lot of attitudes we need to change. So based on that, Petyr, how do you actually reach your intended audience with your films? I mean, how do you get your films out there? How do you get them seen by the people who need to see them?
I mean, to a certain extent, it is money. It's how many festivals you can afford to submit to, how much you can promote your film online. Of course, quality is a large part of that. But I'll say, at least in my experience, and I'll just plug Sundance, they've done a really admirable job of trying to get my film and other Sundance films to Native audiences. The short, the satire was featured on one of their tours that they took across the country to different tribal nations and theaters and community theaters and stuff like that, which I think is ultimately what may work best right now, especially for communities that might not have, excellent broadband access. Just bringing stuff to them, that works a lot. I don't know. I think the internet has also changed a lot of things. It's made it so that there's such a multiplicity of things that it's harder to stand out. But I think in some ways that raises the bar. I don't know.
Yeah, it's always that's a tricky thing. Distribution, getting the work out there. Anpa'o, what have you been doing to try to get your films seen by the people who need to see them?
Yeah, I would say definitely similar to Petyr, feeling very thankful for Sundance because I think they're definitely the people that have been supporting the most. But in terms of like what I did previously, I think what's been really helpful is if I guess I consider myself to be a community organizer. So my priority has always been really to engage and connect with my community. So I've always brought the films who are typically my intended audience, my Native peoples. So I've always brought it to them because I've made sure I prioritize that relationship. Even though I'm doing creations talking about that, I want to make sure that these are the people I'm representing, which seems like it definitely feels like a lot of pressure, but like I want to make sure that sense of reciprocity is like really there and that sense of connection. So I've always just brought it to my community. I haven't necessarily been distributing in the way of like, oh yeah, this is about to be the typical film industry type of way distribution. I've just been doing basically community organizing style. So something that I think is accessible for a lot of people, just really connect and use the sense of reciprocity.
And Lejend, how about you? How do you feel is the best way to get your work out there?
I would agree that there's a lot of different avenues to go down. Like Petyr said, there's film festivals, but there's the financial barrier that often comes with that. And then Anpa'o saying that there's a community engagement avenue that you can go down as well. For me personally, I have utilized social media as my tactic to get to my audience. It's been free, it's quick, and it also kind of creates a community online in a digital space. And I've met so many people digitally and have been fortunate and lucky enough to meet some of them in person as well over the years, but also creating that bond with them and just putting that out there and then making online friends and telling them what you're working on. And also just saying like, look, this is something that I made. This is what it's about. This is who I'm looking for my audience as. And just through the word of mouth of social media, it just kind of reaches everybody and people that you never really thought that it would reach to in the first place too.
Just following up on the idea of financial barriers, Lejend, film is a very expensive art, and I'm sure it helps to have the Sundance name behind you, but how do you finance your films?
Well, for me personally, I have been fortunate enough to be part of Sundance as well and their Indigenous program, and they have really helped Indigenous folks financially, creatively, and also with just having them in our corner as well as mentors. And that's the way that I've been financially able to make my projects and attend the festival and network with other people and kind of create a community with other folks in the industry. Another way that I was able to finance my film was through crowdfunding. And again, that goes hand in hand with the social media tactic that I was talking about, just creating that community in that online space, because once you form that relationship and you engage with them, like people are more willing to support you because they are also supporting the bigger picture and the bigger project that you're talking about, and supporting Native cinema and supporting Native people within that as well.
Good. So Peter, Sundance can't support you forever, so do you have a plan for finding future funding for your films?
Well, I disagree with that. But from my perspective, what they do is once you're in for good. You can't escape. But like Lejend said, one of the biggest ways we financed this short was through crowdfunding, through Kickstarter, which can be very daunting. It was really daunting for me when I was first doing it. But you sort of build up a rhythm with it, and it requires you to really be able to sell your film and know your film on a really intimate level. And so I don't know, I have a lot of good things to say about Kickstarter and Seed and Spark. That's the way I financed my last two larger projects, and I imagine it'll be how I finance this next one. I also think crowdfunding can be a very good alternative to traditional funders who may be looking, maybe not necessarily for shorts, but who are looking for a return on investment, who are looking for a financial outcome. Whereas with Kickstarter, people are funding your film because they believe in your film and they believe in you as a filmmaker and your perspective, and that's its own end. And I hope that gets to be appreciated a bit more.
Good. And Anpa'o, how do you go about finding funding for your films?
Yeah, totally on the same boat of either crowdfunding or that. But if any film producers want to hit me up, your girl is. But yeah, I have basically the same answer as both of them.
So let's switch gears here a little bit. So there have been some recent strides made with Dark Winds and Reservation Dogs, but still, I'm sure you'd all agree, there's still essentially a lack of Native representation in mainstream media. So start with Lejend. How do you feel is the best way to address the lack of Native representation in Hollywood, specifically for mainstream films?
I think it can all start at the top. I think that there is a need for more Native producers and people at the top of the line, and people really pushing for those Native and Indigenous projects in studios, more, because that's often a gap that needs to be filled. I also think that it's important for us Native folks also to get out there to kind of act in films as well. I think we talk often about seeing ourselves represented on screen, but it's my experience when I'm casting, it's been difficult to find willing Native actors to come out. And I think that's also a bigger discussion and topic, probably about finances and also location and also resources. But I think just taking the leap and taking the risk and really going for it. I know that I was super nervous about that, but I think that's also something that I'm interested in as well, because I think again, if you want Native faces on screen, you have to think about like, well, where those Native faces are going to come from. They have to be authentic and they have to come from within our community. And I think just taking that risk to kind of put yourself out there, whether it's like being a producer, being a director, being a writer, being an actor, also working behind the scenes, working in like props or costumes. Those are very important people as well, because they're going to be the people that are going to be making the decisions on how accurate these costumes or props or set decoration are going to be to our Indigenous communities. And it's important for actual Indigenous folks to be able to make those decisions and have their voices heard, especially in those big rooms.
How do you feel about that, Peter? Is it just more Native people need to get out and get involved and be actors, learn about filmmaking? What do you think is the best approach to address the lack of Native representation?
Yeah, I think it has to come from literally everywhere. I think it has to go from the top and the bottom and the middle. Like we said, actors, producers, directors, below the line talent, art department, music department, stuff like that. Of course, I don't think it's necessarily a lack of there aren't just Native people who don't want to do it, but I think there's a certain barrier to entry from the top that's kind of holding things back. I would also argue that just give Native filmmakers money to do these things. I think that a lot of the time, people of color have to jump through so many hoops to be like, why is this the best project? Why is this the Oscar winner? You know, Dances with Wolves, whatever. But I think if you give filmmakers, specifically like, producers, directors, writers, just the money and the access to these resources, I think we will surprise you with what we've been gestating for decades. We have original ideas. We definitely have ideas you haven't been thinking of. More Native people ought to get involved in the process if they would like to, obviously. And studios need to be more willing to just greenlight diverse projects, kind of on the basis of we may as well. I don't think we should have to go through so many hoops to prove ourselves when we know we're making interesting stuff that we can guarantee you haven't seen before.
Well, I think it just takes one hit by a Native filmmaker that will open the floodgates to everybody else.
Yeah, I think, the show's everywhere, but Reservation Dogs is kind of, it is not like the golden god of everything ever, but it has had a noticeable impact on, I think, Native projects getting greenlighted, particularly at studios.
It would be better if it was on an actual network instead of FX.
We can have
but at least
discussion.
but at least it's out there and it's gotten good reviews.
Yeah.
Anpa'o, does community organizing have a role to play in addressing this lack of representation?
Yeah, it's like you knew what I was going to say. I think basically what I think is a really big proponent that I think the three of us can attest to is basically having institutional programs that advocate for you continuously and not it just being solely Sundance. It needs to be more programs, more institutions, and more media companies willing to invest in Native stories. So I think if Native people are not only imaginative, they're incredibly creative, but it's not how creative can you be when you don't have the resources that people who are nepotism babies or have had rich parents that can afford for you to buy a really fancy camera and invest in yourself? How is that accessible and how is that fair? And I think that what's been really helped me nurture as like a filmmaker is having these mentors that will continuously advocate for you. Even if you don't believe in yourself, they have always been my number one supporter because they see something in me, and having that faith and having that belief as me as a creative makes me feel even more stronger. Like I already have imposter syndrome. I already feel like I don't belong, and having that advocacy can really make your difference, not only creatively, but creating giving you that door, giving you that entry to this really gate-kept industry and giving you resources to actually support yourself. So I think mentorship within institutional organizations, just everything, basically all the support that we can give, it will really help the like Native cinema flourish, even though it's currently flourishing right now. And we've had we can see actual Native people telling our stories. But I think this is just the beginning. We can do so much more if we're actually given the resources.
Yeah, I also think as an educator that education has a role to play, specifically in story. When I first got to IAI, the film program that was there really didn't emphasize story. And so what I feel has held a lot of Native filmmakers back over the decades has been the lack of ability to connect with a mainstream audience. And my theory is that it's part of it is a cultural thing, that a lot of Native cultures are have been very protective of their stories. And so a lot of Native films that you've seen over the past 10, 15 years have tended to keep audiences at arm's length because of that. So how can we use story to connect better with audiences, meaningful storytelling? How do you feel about that, Peter? Because I personally think that one of the reasons why Smoke Signals resonated so much with audiences was because of humor. Humor is obviously something you can use to connect with an audience.
Yeah, I think some of that is definitely true. I will say it seems like audiences now are so stratified that there is kind of an audience for everybody, which was, when we were talking about the internet and social media and finding audiences, I think that has also created a more specific taste for everybody. Everybody's looking for a new thing. And I think that's in some ways why network television at large, studio films have gotten a little formulaic, or there's more disinterest because it's perceived as formulaic. I think now there are many more opportunities to get weird and to, kind of push the box a little bit more and have a enthusiastic audience actually looking for that now, whereas before it was such an underground phenomenon.
So Lejend, I think that the horror genre could provide an opportunity, because the great thing about horror is that you can do it low budget, you don't need big stars, and everybody wants to see a good horror film, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think to answer your question about the connection, something that I kind of got in my feedback in school, in my education, was that Native stories don't connect to mainstream audiences. But I argued that it doesn't have to be that way if you focus on the human connection and the emotions and the story that I'm talking about. And when you get hung up on the fact that it's a Native story, you're hindering yourself from being able to connect with this artist's story and what they have to say about the human experience. And that's what I've learned, especially working in that horror genre. I wasn't necessarily trying to make like a horror film and like have like blood everywhere. I was really focused on capturing the story of an a niece and an auntie, and also understanding that relationship between familial people and like person who is not necessarily your biological parent, and also understanding that dynamic, and especially being a young teenager and a young teenage girl kind of growing up in the city and also growing up within your culture and kind of finding yourself. And that's what my film was about specifically, and it just so happened to be about Native people because I am a Native person, and I really want to emphasize the human experience. And I think that's really what I want to get towards people, using story and using the horror genre to reach that mainstream audiences.
Great. And Anpa'o, how do you feel that we can use the universal values of human experience in story to connect with audiences?
I think that's definitely the way to connect with people. Actually, when you first initially brought up the question, I feel like my experimental mindset was like, why do we need to serve the general audience? Why can't we just create films for Native communities? Because, yeah, I guess I feel like, just to respond to that, I feel like a lot of Native cinema has always been about, previously maybe, like, we're still here, and creating that narrative of like, we're still here, which I think is fine, but we're here and we're thriving. We're here and we're resilient. We're here and we're like the blank, like the space is blank, to still allow for, I think, a much more nuanced experience of what it means to be Indigenous, and like remove the restraints of the current narrative of we have of trying to prove that we're still here and trying to prove that people should listen to us. I don't think we need to prove ourselves anymore. We're here and we're going to like tell our own stories, and like you are going to listen whether you like it or not. That's kind of like the approach I'm taking.
Yeah, and I know the challenge for me and my students is how do you tell, regardless of whatever audience you're trying to connect to, how do you tell a good story? Because that's the main thing. A good story will connect with anybody, and when I'm sure all of you have had this feeling that when you're working on a film with a good script, everybody's game raises just a little bit more because they're excited to be working on a film with a good story. So Peter, go ahead.
Actually, yeah, I just want to add one more thing to that. I think I kind of feel two ways about this. One is that from our perspective, we're all Indigenous filmmakers. Whatever film we make is going to be an Indigenous film. I've heard this question all the time of like, is this Indigenous enough? Is this an Indigenous story? Yeah, it innately is. If it were, and I was talking to somebody else about it, if one of us were making a film about a white woman in like San Francisco, that's an Indigenous story. I think the dimension is sort of, how tethered is it to our stories, our histories, our communities. But also, I also think that at least American cinema today, the white gaze, the male gaze, the cis straight gaze is the preeminent mode of cinema. And if we are to break out of that, or even have some slight aberration from that, I think people will go like, what is this? Just because it's not, such a structured monolith that everybody's used to seeing. I just want to say that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That it doesn't matter if you're telling a story about a upper class white family in Manhattan. If you're a Native filmmaker, that's a Native story. I agree with that. So Peter, what is your favorite part of the filmmaking process, and do you have a least favorite part of the filmmaking process?
I think my favorite part is editing and post-production, because that's when you can you go from having all of these possibilities to now having pieces that you have to assemble one way or another. And then you have to incorporate the sort of third-party elements of score and color to that. And that's kind of where you make the film, in my opinion. My least favorite part is probably outlining, because it's the inverse, where you have every idea and you have to decide which one you're going to go with, which ones you're going to sacrifice. That's always such a painful process to me, and I'm in the middle of it right now, and I'm not having a great time. I just want to get to writing the thing. Yeah.
Anpa'o, how about you? Most favorite part and least favorite part?
I actually would say my favorite part, I think, when I specifically think about my experimental films and using a Bolex camera, definitely was like being able to actually have that relationship and like using each frame on the film. Like, I think that really developed a sense of respect for me in using like old school cameras. And I think also adding to that, like what was really awesome, but also really tedious and frustrating was like being in the studio and like having to slice each section of the film, and then you tape it back together, and then you have to look at it and you're like, oh my God, this doesn't look good. And like, even though physically editing, not on a computer, physically editing was like one of the worst feelings I've ever experienced, it was genuinely so rewarding. And I feel like that can just go to maybe any aspect of the film part. Like, it's really frustrating and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. But then when you come at the end and you can see the mistakes and you can see the perfectionists and like the perfect parts, and then you realize it comes together to create this like really wonderful product. So definitely like filming and editing was like really, I think, shifted me as a visual artist.
Great. Lejend, how about you?
My least favorite has been, I would say, the writing aspect of things, because like Peter said, you have so many ideas happening at once and you have to narrow it down, and it's kind of like your baby. For me, it's my baby, and that's the only baby I'll ever have. And it's like you have to tell it no, and it's really hard, and you know that this would be great for this specific project, but you know in your heart that it's not gonna work, so you have to say no, and it's really heartbreaking. But and I also take a really long time to write as well, and it's just hard for me to kind of sit myself down and kind of be like, you're gonna write today, you're gonna do it. That's the most painful part for me personally. The most favorite part of the filmmaking process for me is actually production. I really love seeing the world that I've created inside my head come to life, and I really love being able to see the characters look exactly the way that I pictured them, and working with costumes and makeup and set deck and props, and like it's not like any other feeling that I've had before, because again, as a writer, you're kind of living within your head, and it's a super magical feeling to be able to see everything manifested before you in physical form, and everybody's there working really hard and like as a team in order to get this project and your vision together. And it's also their opportunity to show off their skills as artists as well, and I just really think that's a beautiful process.
Yeah. So last question. Peter, do you have a dream project? If someone gave you $1 million to make a film on any subject, what would it be and why?
It would take more than $1 million. But this short, as I was developing it, I quickly realized it was far more expansive than I had imagined. And I don't know, I think the idea of like kind of a high concept, high production design, indigenous science fiction satire thing is kind of an exhilarating idea to me. This like big box, really, not lavish, but like very detailed, very expansive world, very genre laden. That all really interests me. So if anybody has a lot of money, let me know and I will pitch it to you.
Actually, when you think about it, $1 million won't go very far. But Anpa'o, if someone gave you a lot of money, what would be your dream project?
I'm definitely kind of nervous to share because I hope no one takes it. But definitely my dream project is so I studied abroad in New Zealand during like the height of the pandemic, and just being able to create a reality TV show basically following like different indigenous nations globally, I feel like that would be like super rad, like a travel TV show of like, let's go visit this native nation all the way in this part of the world. That's kind of how I imagine it, but it's more of a selfish desire because I want to go see every native sovereign country. So yeah, that's my goal.
And Lejend, how about you?
I agree with Anpa'o. I'm kind of nervous to share my idea because it's like I said, it's my baby, but also like someone might snatch your baby. I would say something episodic. I've always really loved television, and I think that's a really interesting format to work within, and also allows you to kind of expand on your story that you want to work on. And that's kind of my idea, and I don't want to expand on it further because it's my baby. But episodic is definitely something that I would want to explore if I had a lot of money.
Great. Well, everybody, it looks like that's all the time we have for today. And I'd like to thank our panelists again for sharing their stories. And for closing remarks, I'll turn it back over to Justin.
Thank you, James. I really appreciate you moderating this conversation. And also thank you to Lejend, Petyr, Anpa'o. It was a great conversation. And we're really looking forward to seeing your film work in the future. In addition, thank you to everyone that has attended and worked on our Youth in Action series and those that came before us to make this possible. For more information about upcoming Youth in Action episodes, as well as recordings of previous episodes, and to explore other ways you can enjoy the National Museum of the American Indian from home, visit us at americanindian.si.edu. Thanks.